Hello friends, this is Chartered Accountant Omkar Gadgil. So we have come up with a video on the impact analysis for the proposed provisions of the amendments which have been proposed under the Goods and Services Tax laws in the Finance Bill 2024, that is which was introduced in the Parliament by Honorable Finance Minister today on 23rd of July 2024. Friends, under the indirect taxes, their amendments actually have been both under on the front of customs law as well as the goods and services tax law. Although under the customs law, the more possibility of the more amendments are in terms of the changes in the rate of taxes, and therefore we are limiting our discussion in this with respect to only the amendments under the goods and services tax laws. Now, to start off with some certain important sections that have undergone an amendment. So the proposed provision with respect to the insertion of provision of section 16 subsection 5. So 16 till now, the provision of section 16(4) has been the most disputed, debated, and you can say that the most litigated section under the provision of section 16, as it specifically used to deal with the payment, the permissibility of claiming of credit within the defined timeline. Although there was a change in the timeline for claiming credit, and after also the same was made given a retrospective effect. But more importantly, there were so many unresolved claims which were pertaining to the financial year 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20, and 2021, which were considered as the early days for the GST law. And therefore, a lot of taxpayers had unfortunately missed filing the GSTR 3B returns. The awareness was less, the impact was not really that deeply known, and unfortunately, a lot of small taxpayers, especially I'll say the MSME and SME sector taxpayers, they were facing a lot of challenges on the grounds that the credit was not claimed within the time limit which was prescribed then under the law for claiming an input tax credit with respect to any invoice or debit notes. So, a very you can say huge sigh of relief is going to be really felt by those taxpayers today by virtue of the insertion of this provision under subsection 5 of section 16. Now the proposed provisions, although we have not tried to put in all the provisions in specific, we have just tried to take a snippet of it and the impact analysis thereof. So the proposed provision lays down the permissible time limit in respect of the input tax credit claim for those invoices and debit notes which were received as a taxpayer, as a recipient, which were received from 1st of July 2017 to 31st of March 2021, for all the invoices and debit notes received during this window, during this tax periods. There will be one final date for claiming the input tax credit, that is considered as 30th November 2021, and the credit claim should be made by way of a return filed under section 39, that is GSTR 3B. So in a nutshell, any input service, any invoices or debit notes on the purchase of which you are firstly eligible as a taxpayer for claiming input tax credit, and all that claim was made between the period between the period for the period 1st July 2017 to 31st March 2021, and if the said claim has been made in any of the GSTR 3B returns filed up to 30th day of November 2021, then all such input tax credit shall be eligible irrespective of the fact what was mentioned in section 16 subsection 4 then. And therefore a lot of notices, lot of orders, a lot of pending appeals in the Office of Commissioner Appeals are certainly going to come down because of this amendment, because this is definitely an impact creating amendment. And therefore now what is important around this, that okay, the notices will get dropped, the proceedings will get dropped, it will get relief. However, there is something to ponder upon around this point now. There were recently a few judgments given in the writ petitions filed in various high courts, and there was one common point that was observed, and that's why we thought that we should ponder upon that. In some of the judgments, it has been observed that the claim of credit, even if it was missed in the GSTR 3B return, or the 3B returns were filed nil, or any of such category, but the claim was made in the annual return, the documents are available, then the input tax credit should be allowed. That is what has been mentioned in those judgments. Now, here if we see, even when the section 16 subsection 5 is proposed to be inserted, the insistence for claiming credit comes from section 39. And therefore, if a point in time comes wherein there is going to be a genuine contest कि भाई इसमें आपको input tax credit claim करने मिलेगा, even though when you have missed out in 3B, or you will be entitled to do so. So that will be something that we'll be really looking forward to, in the light of the fact that these judgments have been given in various high courts, and also at the same time there was also a decision in Patna High Court wherein the 16.4 was upheld. And in midst of all this, now we have some breather provision. But again, the emphasis is, what about those taxpayers who could not claim the input tax credit because they have filed nil returns and subsequently they have not accommodated those in the 3B returns? What about those taxpayers and the credit of this? As of now, it looks very bleak, and therefore what happens with respect to these recently issued judgments is really something that we need to look forward to in the higher forum, in the Honorable Supreme Court. If it gives some one sort of an impact in this regard, that is something is going to be worth watching. The next amendment, which is by way of insertion of section 16 subsection 6. Now here, this is in relation to those taxpayers. Now that's amendment in section 16 subsection 5 is purely limited to a specific timeline. Amendment in section 16 subsection 6, on the other side, is in respect of those taxpayers whose registration had been cancelled. Then there was a subsequent revocation of registration. And if such taxpayer is now in need of claiming credit, often what used to happen, that let's say that there was a taxpayer whose registration was cancelled and subsequently his registration cancellation was revoked. Then during this interim phase, or for the time being, his credit claim was in a jeopardy. It was really dicey whether he is going to get a credit. A lot of officers on the field have been denying credit in such cases that we have all observed. Now, what this proposed provision is trying to encapsulate, let's see. The proposed provision envisages that the remedy to ensure no loss of claim of eligible input tax credit during the period when the cancellation persists. So we have taken a couple of illustrations to see how the provision really is going to be implemented, or rather impacting, to be very specific. So let's say we have taken an illustration that A Limited has made a purchase during FY 24-25. The last date for claiming credit in respect of any invoice or debit note for the period 24-25 will be by default 30th of November 2025. Now, if the registration was cancelled in the year December 2024, but the revocation is done before the date of filing, before the date of claiming credit as per section 16(4) for 24-25, which is September 25 में वो आपका revocation of cancellation हो चुका है. मतलब normally 24-25 के लिए, if you want to claim the credit, the last date up to which you can claim the credit is 30th November 2021. In this particular case, we are assuming that December 24 में registration cancel हो गया था. September 25 में the registration revocation of cancellation has taken place, and that means that जो 24-25 year के लिए due date है for claiming credit, last date है for claiming credit, that is the 30th day of November of 2025 or date of filing of annual return, whichever is early, which is more likely going to be 30th of November 2025. ऐसे केस में this taxpayer will be eligible to claim the input tax credit for all this period, interim period, especially December 24 से लेके September 25 तक में, beg your pardon, March 25 तक का जो भी missed out credit है, that he will be able to claim since his revocation of cancellation has happened before the time limit for claiming credit has exhausted for the year 24-25. Right? Now the next situation, if the registration is cancelled after the end of 24-25, let's say that it was cancelled in June 25, the revocation of cancellation was done in the month of December 25. So देखो क्या हो गया है, that ये cancellation का जितना दौरान time है, that has actually crossed the last date for availing input tax credit for 24-25, which was 30th of November 25. Now in such case, the provision further says that if this happens, that the time limit has been elapsed, then the input tax credit can be claimed within 30 days from the date of such revocation of cancellation. Means what? कि अगर आपका 24-25 का क्रेडिट क्लेम करना बाकी था, जून 25 से लेकर दिसंबर 25 तक आपका रजिस्ट्रेशन एक्टिव नहीं था, कैंसिल्ड था, बट आपको अगर 24-25 का कोई क्रेडिट क्लेम करना रह गया है एंड नाउ द टाइम लिमिट ऑफ 30th नवंबर इज आल्सो पास्ड, बट हियर इट से द प्रपोज्ड प्रोविजन सेज within 30 days from such revocation of cancellation you will be allowed to claim the credit. So it is sort of in fact going even beyond the scope of 16.4. It is ensuring that okay, there is still a window drawn for such taxpayers to claim the credit, and which is rather really a welcoming move. Now we have a practical situation to test. If the registration was cancelled in say December 25, revocation takes place in February 26, but there is some unclaimed portion of credit which was there for 14, I mean 24-25. So देखो अभी technically speaking 24-25 का last day of credit claiming क्या था? It was November 30th November 2025. आपने तभी तक सपोज मिस आउट कर दिया, कोई क्रेडिट नहीं लिया है, अभी आप ये चीज का you want to take a shelter of 16 subsection 6 proposed provision saying that boss, my registration was cancelled in December 25, it was restored in January, I mean February 26, so ये interim period में मुझे क्रेडिट क्लेम करने के लिए आई शुड बी अलाउड अ विंडो ऑफ 30 days. लुक, यू विल बी अलाउड टू क्लेम द क्रेडिट बट नॉट ऑफ 24-25, बिकॉज आपका प्राइमरीली जो 16.4 का टाइमलाइन है वो ऑलरेडी पास होने के बाद आपका कैंसिलेशन हुआ था. So this is something that you need to remember very carefully, that this provision cannot be used conveniently, and therefore the provision proposed has been given both the colors. One, when the benefits are available, as in when the credit claim is available, and secondly, when it can be even under a challenge for that matter. Now next, see, this has been there, I mean in the council meeting anyways, this came up and this was really a buzz creating thing, that there is a proposed amendment to waive off the interest and penalty on demands which are arising out of section 73 notices issued for the period July to 1st July 2017 to 31st of March 2020, that is 1718, 1819, 1920. Now, what it says, if there was an outstanding demand under where the notice was issued under section 73, matlab non-fraud cases, cases other than fraud, willful misstatement, suppression of facts. If notice was issued under any of, I mean any of the circumstances other than fraud, willful misstatement, suppression of fact, and of course it does not cover any cases of refund reduction, I mean the refund rejections, etc. In a case where such scenario existed, if the show cause notice is issued but order is yet to be passed, which practically right now is not possible, if the adjudication order was issued but the appeal was, I mean the appeal has been passed or the appeal order has not yet been disposed of, if the appeal order has been disposed of and you have probably filed a declaration that you will be filing an appeal before the honorable tribunal, or in I mean any of these circumstances, if your demand is still outstanding to be paid, now there will be a notified date which up to which आपको permit किया जाएगा कि आपका ये 73 का full demand as per the notice, if you are ready to pay the tax amount by a notified date which is to be given, अगर आप वो दिन तक if you pay the tax, your interest and penalty and I mean interest under section 50 and the penalty is levied under the act will stand waived off by virtue of this provision of section 128A which is proposed to be inserted. Very important point is, whatever is there in the show cause notice, the word specifically mentions full amount has been paid, the full tax demand is agreed to be paid. So it is very important that the full tax demand is paid actually, then only this makes more sense and this benefit can be really availed. If somebody wishes to say that okay, I want to challenge only the part of the order and the rest of the part I don't want to challenge, but I want to take the benefit or shelter of this, that will not be practically possible, and that is what this says. Of course there will be some challenges to this, there will be some litigation around this, but from an understanding perspective, what we need to understand is that okay, here there are limited scopes which have been given: notice issued, order not issued, order issued, appeal not yet disposed of, appeal has been disposed of, appeal before the tribunal is yet not admitted. In all such scenarios you will be allowed to do this. Now suppose in a scenario where the original show cause notice was issued under section 74, The original show cause notice was challenged on the grounds that this notice has been incorrectly issued under section 74, means the criteria for determining for making the case under the fraud, willful misstatement, suppression of fact is found to be incorrect, ineligible under that section. And if any tribunal or any writ court, for instance, let's say, says that yes, there is an intervention needed, the notice should not have been issued under section 74, the notice was fit under section 73. That means it was a case of non-fraud scenario. If such order is passed by the due date, by the date which is notified, अगर ऐसा कोई order में आपका कोई notice pending है, again for that notice which has been now given a taint free kind of a recognition, and it is like a 73 notice, so that will also be eligible for this waiver. Now the worst part of this is, if any interest or penalty has been already paid, then there will be no refund which will be permitted. If even a tax is paid earlier, and tax anyways has not been waived, but if any interest and penalty has been waived, paid, etc., beg your pardon, if it has been paid earlier, there is no refund which will be permissible now. The waiver can be claimed for matters pending before any court authority if the same is withdrawn. Now, what they are only saying is that if the orders are pending in the appeal on the notified date, then if you are withdrawing those appeals and availing this, then only the benefits under then the waiver under this section will be permitted. So a very important section, and again a taxpayer beneficiary section, because in the beginning times, in the early stages of GST law, a lot of innocent mistakes have also happened and leading to a lot of disputes and notices under section 73. The challenge is that not every demand in 73 may be agreeable to you, but in the interest of the business, if you feel that paying off this amount is better than going for a litigation, then of course this is a waiver that you should really not miss out on. Now, there is a proposed introduction of section 74A, which is going to be a fusion of existing section 73 and 74. Section 73, that is recovery proceedings under non-fraud cases and recovery proceeding under fraud cases, section 74, ये दोनों के लिए sunset आ गया है 31st of March 2024. With effect from 1/4/2024, all the recovery proceedings will be under the provisions of section 74A. Now see, प्रैक्टिकली आज तो हम लोग को कोई 24-25 का नोटिस भेजने नहीं वाला है, तो जो भी 24-25 का ऑनवर्ड्स नोटिस आएंगे, दे विल ऑल बी अंडर सेक्शन 74. This section has been in fact designed in such a way that it takes care of both section 73 and 74 scenarios, that is fraud and non-fraud cases. Primarily it starts with if any tax is not paid, not levied, short levied or short paid, or it has been erroneously refunded, or the input tax credit has been wrongly availed or utilized. In all such cases, the notice can be issued within 42 months from the end of the from the end of the date of the annual return, which is relevant to the financial year. So मान के चलते हैं कि 24-25 फाइनेंशियल ईयर के लिए अगर एनुअल रिटर्न डेट इज 31st December 2025, फ्रॉम 31st December 2025 42 months तक का टाइम अलाउड है टू इशू अ शो कॉज नोटिस. It does not matter whether it is a case of fraud or non-fraud, 42 months are allowed. Now, if before the issuance of show cause notice, the taxpayer voluntarily pays the tax, interest, tax and interest, and his case is not a case which is falling under the fraudulent or any other means, then his only tax amount stands to be paid and along with the interest applicable, but the penalty will be completely waived off, and the show cause notice anyways will not be issued. So we are saying voluntarily, if somebody decides to pay the tax, then there will be no such SCN issued at all. Now, if somebody wants to willingly pay the tax, where the case is actually of, let's say, wrong or willful misstatement, suppression of fact, but voluntarily before issuance of a show cause notice, that person comes up and is is willing to pay that amount, then penalty will be 10% of tax due in cases not involving beg your pardon. Firstly, where the SCN has been issued, we'll first cover the provisions where the voluntary payment is in other case. Okay, so if the tax payment happens on the if the tax payment is made voluntarily along with interest and the case is not of a fraud category, then fraud or willful misstatement, etc., then there will be no show cause notice issued. first and foremost thing. Now, if the cases involve fraud, willful misstatement, but there is a voluntary payment, then that tax and interest has to be paid along with a 15% penalty. Now, of course, nobody is going to take a flag and say that okay, I am paying a voluntary tax because there was a case of fraud. But if let's suppose that there was some unintentional or by any reason, but the case is fit to be called as the recovery under fraud or willful misstatement or suppression of fact, then of course that tax, if it is paid along with interest and a rider of 15% penalty, then no show cause notice will be issued. Now, if in either case the show cause notice is issued, if the show cause notice is issued, then firstly, if the show cause notice is issued and within 60 days from the date of issuance of notice, normally it would have been 30 days till now, now it has been proposed to increase it to 60 days. If the show cause notice is issued within 60 days, in a non-fraud scenario, if the tax is paid along with interest, no penalty shall be levied. If the case involving fraud, willful misstatement, etc. is existing, the show cause notice has been issued, and within 60 days the tax is being paid in such case, then the tax plus interest plus a 25% penalty will be payable. Now, in non-fraud case, अगर आपका show cause notice के बाद payment हो चुका है, then your proceedings get dropped. In fraud case category, if the order is passed, means show cause notice was issued but the payment and all was not sufficient, the order is passed. From the date of passing of order also, if within another 60 days you pay the tax plus interest plus the penalty to the extent of 50% of tax amount, then that proceedings will also stand dropped. Otherwise, in normal circumstances, the provisions are proposing to say that the penalty will be 10% of the tax due in cases not involving fraud, and the penalty will be 100% of the tax in cases involving fraud. So allegation करते वक्त इतना इतना penalty तो base में आपको आना ही है. So simple, if you are having a voluntary payment and non-fraud case, only pay tax and interest. If you are voluntarily paying tax and interest and 15% penalty because there was a possibility of a fraud case and voluntary payment है, फिर no show cause notice. नॉन फ्रॉड केस में शो कॉज नोटिस आता है, शो कॉज नोटिस आने से विद इन 60 डेज आप पेमेंट करते हो टैक्स प्लस इंटरेस्ट, अगेन देयर विल बी नो पेनल्टी. फ्रॉड वाले केस में शो कॉज नोटिस आया, आपने टैक्स पेमेंट किया, इंटरेस्ट पे किया एंड 25% पेनल्टी पे किया, विद इन 60 डेज योर एससीएन गेट्स ड्रॉप्ड. इफ ऑर्डर इज इशूड, ऑर्डर इशू होने से 60 दिन के अंदर अगर आप फ्रॉड वाले केस में टैक्स प्लस इंटरेस्ट प्लस 50% ऑफ टैक्स अमाउंट पे करते हो, अगेन द प्रोसीडिंग्स गेट ड्रॉप्ड. The time limit for given for completion and of an order from the date of issuance of show cause notice is 12 months. So it's a very substantially high time. Now, a single provision of case involving fraud, willful misstatement, etc. may act like a double-edged sword. Why? Because अभी तक कैसा होता था, नोटिस 73 में आया तो ओके नॉन फ्रॉड केस है, 74 में आया तो फ्रॉड केस है. नाउ 74A is a common provision. So it will be important to scrupulously see that okay, whether the allegation is under the fraud category or non-fraud category, based on which your technically your assessment will be done or the adjudication will be done further. Right? Now, the proposed amendment in the reinsurance business is, now in reinsurance, technically what happens that one is the insured, that is the person who has taken the insurance services. Insurer is the first party who has done the insurance, and reinsurer is the second party who is doing a reinsurance. So we have taken an illustration just to put it in a simple scenario, that there is a schedule 3 transaction which will there's a schedule 3 transaction introduction over here. A new transaction will be introduced in schedule 3. Intermediate services between the reinsurer and the insurer, means the first insurance company and second insurance company, इन दोनों के बीच में जो supply of services होता है, इंश्योरेंस सर्विस भी, कमीशन का भी, बिजनेस डेवलपमेंट मतलब कमीशन का भी, ये दोनों सर्विसेज को शेड्यूल 3 में they are proposing to put up, subject to the condition that on the first insurance premium which is charged to the customer, on the full value which is inclusive of all the charges, commissions, etc., GST is paid. If that exists, then means यहाँ पे ऐसे कैसे हो रहा है, suppose Mr. K has insured his car which is worth rupees 5 crores from X Insurance Limited. K का privity of contract is only with X Insurance Company Limited. Now X has ceded 50% of the risk to Y Insurance Company. There is no privity of contract between Mr. K and Y Insurance Company. So here the intermediate transaction between Messrs X Insurance Limited and Y Insurance Limited, that is the reinsurance agreement, that intermediate transaction of reinsurance, and against which the commission payment, I mean the commission will be due because X is getting business for Y, those both intermediate transactions will be considered as a Schedule 3 transaction if the first insured value, insurer का जो premium value full value के ऊपर GST is getting paid, and there is no further apportionment thereof on full value, which is also covering the insured charges, I mean the reinsurance charges as well as the commission on the reinsurance, वो inclusive of that अगर full value पे GST पे किया जाता है तो ये intermediate transaction will go and fall as a schedule 3 transaction. Again necessary है कि जैसे रूल 42 में देर आर एक्सेप्शंस दैट रूल 42 43 कौन से शेड्यूल 3 ट्रांजैक्शंस पे नहीं लागू होता है, वैसे इंश्योरेंस केस में री इंश्योरेंस के अगर ये प्रपोज प्रोविजन आते हैं तो parallelly what happens in rule 42 43 that has not been mentioned, so that is something that we need to look forward for reversing the common credit of input tax. Now we come out to the amendments which are more generic in the sense that these are amendments which are having one or two touch-ups to be discussed actually. So the levy of GST, section 9 subsection 1, which used to be read as there shall be levied a tax to be called as central goods and services tax on all goods and services except for alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Now it will also include the undenatured extra neutral alcohol or rectified spirit which is used for manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. These components are the primitive components, that is the alcohol based chemical components which are necessary for manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. They are being brought out of the purview of GST law, but very importantly now undenatured extra neutral alcohol or a rectified spirit may be having another usages also. So if that is, I mean, if that is so the case, then in such case you may also be requiring to they may be otherwise required to pay the GST, but only if it is used for manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption, then only it can be considered as to be outside the purview of GST. This is our primary understanding from this amendment, and therefore it will be important to of course see that what exactly comes up when the this amendment is brought in, that not in all cases of such extra neutral alcohol and rectified spirit maybe the purview has been they have been taken away from the purview. It specifically mentions use for manufacture of alcoholic liquor, so only in a scenario if it is used it will be considered as a non GST, I mean non taxable transaction, non GST transaction. Now there is a new insertion of section 11A which was again discussed in the 53rd council meeting. Here what is relevant to be understood is that this in the 53rd council meeting there was a specific insertion, with respect to what exactly happens when transactions which are having a nature of common parlance theory based transactions are to be considered, and how the taxability on those transactions are to be determined, and whether exemptions are to be provided and how they will be provided. Now in the pre-GST regime in central excise and customs, this common parlance theory was very widely, I mean which was very fondly discussed in a lot of cases also it had got discussed. So to discuss the classification of good, whether it is a medicament or it is a beauty product, then whether it is an ice cream or it is anyways otherwise. So in all these cases this particular points were discussed. Section 11 capital A is proposed to be included in the act to state, to give the power to government to provide exemptions in cases where the transactions which are considered to be otherwise, means considering the common practices common parlance theory, if there are certain transactions which are found to be eligible for exemption, या फिर करंटली जो जीएसटी उनके ऊपर लेवी किया जा रहा है अगर वो उनके नॉर्मल अंडरस्टैंडिंग से भी ज्यादा है, जो कॉमन पार्लेंस अंडरस्टैंडिंग सपोज उस गुड्स के लिए 5% का है, and then now it is say in 12% or 18% bracket, then that differential tax or the entire tax as the case may be, उसको exemption देने के लिए एक provision create किया गया है, that is in section 11A. So this is how 11A is placed. There is no specific transaction for which any notification has been issued as yet. There is only a proposal to include this provision, especially to make a exemption eligible in such scenarios where the exemption is driven on the criteria of this common parlance theory. All right, next. There is a small amendment with respect to time of supply of services in case of reverse charge mechanism. So, in case of reverse charge mechanism, the time of supply of services was the earlier of date of entry in the books of accounts, date of debit entry in the books of accounts, or the date immediately following 60 days from the date on which an invoice or any other document as may be prescribed, invoice or any other document in lieu thereof was issued by the supplier. Now it has been expanded to say that date of entry in the books of accounts or date of entry in the books of account 1, date immediately following 60 days on which the supplier issues the invoice, where he is required to issue an invoice in first place, क्योंकि not in every transaction of reverse charge supplier was issuing an invoice. So there was a slight loophole over there. So now they have specified, if a supplier who is supplying goods or service, beg your pardon, who is supplying services which are liable to be taxed under the in the hands of recipient under reverse charge, but if such supplier is specifically asked to issue an invoice, then that date of invoice or the date of invoice issued by the recipient as a recipient of reverse charge services, that date, whichever is earlier, will be the time of supply. At the same time, an amendment is proposed in 31 subsection, 31 clause F, where it says that the invoices to be issued in respect of input services received where the tax is payable under reverse charge mechanism has to be issued within a prescribed time. क्या था, अभी तक उसके लिए कोई timeline cut off नहीं था for issuing an invoice. This is like a self invoice, what we used to normally call for reverse charge purposes. So please remember, now it will be mandatory to have a self invoice one, that is the invoice issued for purchase of services, and there is a dedicated timeline. Now practically what we have observed is that in lot of audits, when the reverse charge recoveries have been determined, the authorities were kind enough to say that okay, you pay the taxes along with interest and you can claim the credit. But now if the time of supply gets defined, then over there the only thing is that invoice टाइम में आपने बनाया नहीं, या फिर इनवॉइस का जो प्रिपरेशन टाइम है फॉर अ रेसिपिएंट अंडर रिवर्स चार्ज, if that is not made within the permissible time limit, then the default happens on even the invoice preparation or the invoice issuance in respect of a reverse charge transaction. So that is something that will be required to be looked forward to, that exactly what this timeline is being given for issuing that invoice. Of course it should be somewhere around a 60 days bracket only, which makes sense to that time of supply provision also under section 30. The deductor of tax at source, TDS, means entities who are government entities and government companies, and those entities which have been specifically notified under section 52 for 51 for deduction of tax at source. Till now their filing of returns has always been a problem because there were several extensions, there were a lot of irregular filings, and the provision earlier said that if there is a deduction in a particular tax period, only then the return has to be filed for that tax period. Now it has been, in order to ensure that ये streamline होना चाहिए, they have introduced this amendment in section 39(3) which says that the TDS deductor will be required to file a return every calendar month irrespective of the fact whether there was any deduction during that month or not. So they will also file sort of a nil return if there was no deduction of tax during any month, because वो TDS deduction has to reflect in the records of the supplier of goods who has supplied goods to the such sort of a TDS deductor, goods or services, beg your pardon. So this was relevant that this time to time compliance is required to be done even by that government recipient entity, government company, or a entity, government organization which is notified for the TDS deduction purposes. Even the local authorities are a part of it. So of course this is going to make it very necessary on their part to do the compliance, but on a monthly basis, and now I believe there will be a very less chance of any extensions. So this has to be sort of considered as from them to them kind of a kind of an imposition. There's a proposed amendment in section 70 which is regarding the powers to issue summons. Now this is the last one that we are going to discuss for this. So powers to issue summons, till now the summons proceeding, for the summons proceeding, it was only the taxpayer who was entitled to go and give the statement and all the make the submissions necessary as and when required. It was either by the anti-evasion authority, by the DGGI, etc. The section 70 was used for issuing summons in such case. Now they have permitted the representation by a authorized representatives. Practically, a few times what we have also observed is that when a taxpayer is made to go and give a statement, firstly, a lot of time it so happens that he not being very much aware about the full provisions of the law, and he not being very much comfortable sitting in the tax office, there have been instances where the statements are recorded not what actually exists, but there was something which has come up from the conversations between the officers and the taxpayer. And in that, in that sort of an environment, which is a sort of a controlled environment, the taxpayer has ended up mentioning something which probably actually did not even exist. But so there was a sort of a duress under which he has to be always been giving the statements. Needless to mention, this is not something that we say that okay, every person who is given a summons is an innocent person. But by and large, in cases where the person is represented by somebody, it helps him get represented better, and only the relevant things which are in need of in line with his business, only those are presented before the tax authorities. And therefore I feel that this is really a good move, that the inclusion of giving when inclusion of making a representation is allowed. Now the only thing is that civil code of procedures was applied in is rather applied in every case when someone, I mean, the statement is recorded against someone. Here the only thing is that it says that it has to be a truthful declaration, but the certainty about it and accountability, if the representative is ready to take or not for giving that statement, that is something which is going to be really posed as a challenge. So, friends, these are the amendments that have been proposed under the goods and services tax laws. There are also certain amendments which wherein section 74, wherever it exists in the law, the 74 has been replaced by 74A, because that is what a new provision of 74A is going to be enacted. And with effect from 1/4/24, it will be the provision for governing the recoveries, etc. On the other side, there are I mean, on the other side, there is only one change which we have not discussed specifically, that was actually already something which was proposed earlier, that supply of goods with or without payment of tax, which are made as a zero rated supply, the refunds in respect of such transaction will not be allowed if those goods are subjected to export duty. So whether you are doing it with payment or without payment, if on those goods, if there is an export duty payable, then there is no such refund which will be allowed in such case. That is what is also the part of the amendment. So friends, we have tried to make a brief analysis of the provisions. Do let us know your comments, your views in this regard. Our contact details are here. My entire team, my co-founder Abhinay, Sachin, Santosh have been very helpful in helping me to prepare this presentation. So our contact details as under. If for any queries, feel free to reach out to us. So I shall sign off for the while. So thank you so much for this patient listening, and I hope that we have a fruitful discussion, and please reach out to us for any further discussions to be made. Thank you so much. Jai Hind. Take care. Good night.